Tuwezi kuchukua mbuzi wetu kupelekea fisi ya chungu.
My friend, you cannot be seen to be trying to apportion blame and blame others.
Wakenya wakakosa makao kwa sababu ya tamaa ya mtu mmoja.
Very good evening to you. Welcome to Crossfire. This is a show that will take a look at what politicians will be saying on the campaign trail and interpreting it from both political sides. And we will do this for you and with you until we have the rerun. And indeed, after that particular rerun, welcome to the program. I'm Linda Ogutu. We have our panelists in studio. We have Mheshimiwa Gladys Wanga, Homa Bay Woman Rep. Ma'am, thank you so much for creating time for us. And we also have Isaac Mwaura, who's a nominated senator. Thank you so much for joining us as well on Crossfire. So before we begin this conversation, because both of you represent the two sides of the political divide, so you represent NASA, you represent Jubilee, your leaders and Kenyans would like to have answers with respect to certain aspects or certain issues that they think you need to talk about. So one of the key issues that Kenyans want to talk about is the rerun date. Are we having this on 17th, on 24th, or on 31st? And this is the reason why I'm saying this. Take a look at what different politicians have had to say about it.
There will be no elections on the 17th of October until some of the conditions which you have spelled out in the statement are met by the IBC.
Uchaguzi ikifanyika tarehe 17, bwana kitendawili ama mwanasiasa mwingine yoyote hawezi kufa. Tufanye uchaguzi tarehe 17.
Ameamua sasa hata kazi ya IBC yeye ndio atafanya.
Commission, as it is currently constituted, should not conduct these elections because the commission itself has been indicted. The commission has been found to be very wanting.
Na kama wanasema hawaamini IBC, viongozi wao wanafanya nini kuwa swearing in? Kama wanasema hawaamini mambo ya IBC.
Kama kweli IBC ilifanya ukora, huyo Orengo ambaye mnatembea na yeye, si umwambie aende ajiuzulu kesho.
Sisi hatuwezi kuogopa wale watu. Sisi tuko na watu wengi zaidi. Lakini turudi kwa debe kwa masharti yao. Sisi tuko na masharti. Kwanza wale ambao waliiba kura zetu.
Sisi tunajua bwana kitendawili ako na njama ya kuunda serikali ya mkato ya bandia kupitia nusu mkate, ndio hataki mambo ya uchaguzi. Sisi tunamwambia bwana kitendawili hiyo ni ndoto ya mchana.
Okay, so there's been lots of back and forth. Mheshimiwa, let me begin with you. Are we ready as a country to have an election or a rerun, so to speak, on the 17th of October?
I think the IBC has already pronounced itself. The date has been gazetted. So the question of when we are going to have the election is not in question. Because it is not a determination of political parties. I do not think the two candidates who, according to the Supreme Court ruling, are supposed to be the one on the ballot until maybe a Kura court is allowed, have to determine which date. They don't have that power. They don't have that leeway where they say, oh, you know, if one of the candidates, for example, does not participate, now that is, the election will still go on because the election has been said. And let it be very clear.
So whatever happens, we're having this election on the 17th of October?
The IBC is the one that has set the date.
Yes.
It has already been gazetted.
But you do know NASA is a little bit uncomfortable about that date.
NASA is uncomfortable, but then the date has been set. No, we are not having a situation where political parties are being told, can we now haggle over which dates? You see, if that were to be the case, like for example, there was a meeting that maybe aborted or people are just expressing their views in anticipation of a final decision, then we would be speaking about that.
Should there have been that meeting, maybe to just consult on the date?
I don't think so, because that is the role, that is the independent aspect of the IBC. I mean, if IBC was to be acting on persuasions of political parties, you know, you can listen to people, but by the end of the day, you are the one who makes that decision, because nobody makes that decision. And I don't, on behalf of the IBC, and I don't think we in Jubilee are complaining that we were not consulted on that date. Because obviously we were not expecting that would have a say on that date, primarily because the Supreme Court, much as we disagreed with the ruling, the constitutional mandate of who runs the elections at what point in time in this country is Chapter 15 Constitution Commission, and this in this case is IEBC.
Mheshimiwa. Yeah. Well, I think there are two things there. One, in the morning of the date that the IEBC set the date of election, Matiang'i came out and said, we want us to have elections on 17th. That was like at 10 in the morning. At 3, IEBC were announcing that we were going to have elections on 17th. What that looked like to Kenyans out there and to ourselves was there was consultation between IEBC and Jubilee through Matiang'i. Yet, NASA was not consulted, being a key partner here. Secondly,
he says they were not consulted, though.
No. Matiang'i came out in the morning and said, have elections on 17th, as if even to direct IEBC. 3 o'clock, IEBC was saying we're going to have elections on 17th. That is a big question in our minds. But the date being the date. Secondly, there's the issue of the issues that we have raised, serious issues. We are not going back to election because we like. We're going back to election because the Supreme Court said that the previous election was not held according to the law, which means some people have been indicted within IEBC. We have conditions that we have put. We are saying, at the very least, let's talk. Let's sit around the table and talk. Who was responsible for not conducting election as per law? We have to agree. These same people cannot go ahead to conduct elections.
So when you say you have to agree...
There are certain bare minimums. The servers that created this whole problem. We want to see what is in those servers, because this was already ordered by the Supreme Court. So what we were saying is, okay, if all these things can be done even by tomorrow, we are ready to have elections. In any case, we already went to elections on the 8th. There's really nothing new that's going to happen. We already went to elections, but what we are saying is some things must be sorted out so that we are not in the same problem that we were in on 8th of August. I do not think that that is too much to ask. And if Jubilee have nothing to hide, they should be willing to sit around a table so that people agree that these are certain bare minimums that must be met before IEBC goes into election. And this is the reason we are talking about this date. It's not because IEBC does not have the mandate to set it. It is IEBC that has mandate to set it. But we want IEBC to make us comfortable as key participants in this election that the issues that we have raised have been addressed.
Would Jubilee be willing to sit down and look at some of these issues and try to sort them out?
I think Jubilee is on record as having said that they are not going to be the IEBC without the other side of NASA. I mean, Aden Duale, our majority leader, has actually said so, and that remains to be the position of Jubilee, because we do not want to have a situation where you meet this group, you say this, and you meet that group, you say that, because also Wafula Chebukati has also kind of come out a bit as not very firm. And so you don't want to confuse the country. But also, let us be very clear on exactly what transpired. Is that, number one, the Supreme Court is saying that they are going to give us a considered judgment of the reasons why they nullified the presidential elections after 21 days. And so it is on the basis of those reasons that the IEBC will now tighten the bolts, know where the problem is. What we are witnessing right now, Linda, is mob lynching. We are seeing the NASA principles saying we cannot go to election because of this and that reason. And yet there is no official communication from the courts clearly saying this is what went wrong. Until and at the point where that happens, we cannot go and say, oh, there was a memo from Chebukati, or there was what. And even going to the point of even saying that particular officer must be removed from the IEBC. And the other thing that my good friend Gladys has said, Matiang'i was not communicating a political decision. He said, and it is official, that he was pleading with the IEBC to consider having an election date before 17th, not on 17th, because of the exams, okay? So he was trying to look at the exam calendar, which of course we all agree is critical because these children have been preparing for the last 8 years, for the last 4 years, so that they can actually exercise their mandate as students, as pupils.
To be fair, it doesn't look weird that Matiang'i comes in the morning and then says we need to consider the exam date, and then in the afternoon IEBC says, okay, fine, you're having an election.
IEBC was supposed to determine remember both sides of the political divide had actually implored upon the IEBC to set the date. It was on a Monday, I think they had given an indication that they are going to say they did on Monday or Tuesday. And the earlier they did, the better. In fact, I would want to imagine that IBC would have preferred even to have the date on 1st of November, if at all it was possible, because they need more time to, of course, reorganize and to organize an election that maybe they were not as prepared to do because they thought they had already done their job. So for me, I don't think it's suspect. It's just a question of putting the interest of the children of Kenya first, and that is important.
Well, Mheshimiwa, we're putting the interest of the children first.
I think the interest of our children cannot be gainsaid. We are all parents, and we know that the interests of our children are important. But that is not the only issue that should determine the date of the election. What we were saying is this: apart from the date of the exam, which should also have been put on the table or during that conversation, there are several other issues, including the issues that we have raised. Is IEBC going to be able to reorganize themselves? Al-Gurea, should they be the ones to print the ballot papers? What were the issues there? Or do we need to get a new contractor to print for us ballot papers? You know, and our servers, are they still in good order? Is there anything that happened to them? So I think all of these things should have been put on the table before we came to the date of election. And this is what we are saying. IEBC should give a hearing to all parties and say, okay, we're going to determine the date based on the fact that we agree we are going to go with Al-Gurea, our servers are in good order. Now these scanners and whatever else that were bought for scanning of results, are they in place? You know, all these things that have been raised. But coming back to the issue of who should be indicted, I think there are certain specific things, even before the ruling comes out. When it was said by the court that this election was not conducted as per law, there are certain people who are responsible for certain things. For example, the issue of accessing the server. The Supreme Court gave orders for their servers to be accessed. But there were certain people who were standing in the way of accessing those servers, and Chiloba being one of them. And that is why we are raising the issue of Chiloba. A lot of the ruling of the court, we know, I mean, a lot of the issues that were raised in court, because the results can only be nullified on the basis that the petitioners, who are ourselves, brought on the table. A lot of the issues that were raised were with regards to IT and so on and so forth. It does not take rocket science to tell that the results were nullified on the basis of some of those key issues that we raised. And it does not take rocket science to map out who is responsible for all the issues that were raised. And then that is the basis from which we identified officers whom we feel should step aside before we proceed with this election. So I think it's not too much to ask.
So both sides have issues with some of the officials within the commission.
No, you see, Jubilee have not really put on the table what they want.
It's very unfair for my dear sister Gladys to come here and tell Kenyans that based on rumors and innuendos,
there are no rumors and innuendos here.
You can start saying that, oh, remove Chiloba or remove so and
Which
so.
rumors and
Because
innuendos?
By the end of the day, the national returning officer of the IEBC is Wafula Chebukati.
We are dealing with
He is the head of the commission. And that should not be lost to Kenyans. And even when it is Wafula Chebukati, there is a due process, other than him resigning. There is a due process through which then you incriminate somebody, you take them, they defend themselves, and Chiloba is on record. Okay. Let me make this point, Linda, for purposes of fairness. Chiloba has actually said that if he is found culpable, he will step aside, he will resign. He has said so. But that due process is yet to be followed. We cannot come here and start telling Kenyans that, oh, now it's about a contract with Al-Gurea, knowing very well the history that we have had with the court cases. We have to have an election. We need to get the reasons, and we are not on a fishing expedition. But we cannot start speculating. Let the results come out from the judgment. Let the IEBC be able to prepare and change whatever is wrong, and then we can move forward as a country. But what I'm seeing, Linda, is a situation where NASA is actually putting roadblocks because they don't want just to go for the election.
You see, Linda, we have already come from an election which we won and Jubilee stole. So there's no reason we should fear going for another election. Surely, this is
still or was the process. The process have issues.
No, Jubilee stole this election. This is why even Wafula Chebukati was asking, why was my password? Why was a username created in my name? Passwords accessing without even my consent. So there are a lot of issues there, and this is why we are going back to another election. And there's this issue that Jubilee keep raising, saying that oh, we don't want to go for an election.
Do you want to go for an election?
We want Nusumkate. it is the Jubilee lawyers, actually, Fred Ngatia to be specific, who pleaded with the court, saying that please don't return us back to an election. Please, if at worst, even you can bring people together and let people work together. So the people who truly cannot win this election and want Nusumkate is Jubilee, and they are running ahead of everybody else to say that we want Nusumkate. But I think the issues that were raised even in that memo by Chebukati to Chiloba are very, very serious. And we are dealing with 60 days here. So if we have 60 days here, we have to decide what is expeditious. What can we do within those 60 days? We cannot wait for the entire, take Chiloba to court, let him be found guilty. So wait, this cannot happen within 60 days, And Maura is raising the issue of the chairman. However much we have issues with the chairman, and we do, we cannot. You have issues with the chairman and CEO as well. Yes, but we cannot. We know legally that it will not be possible to conduct to remove the chairman within the time that we have legally, because the president is lame duck. He is unable to make this appointment, which he is the one who has to make. So we have to. That is why I was talking about a bare minimum. What is it that is the bare minimum that we can restructure and work with before we get to the next election? Okay. All right.
I think Gladys is, sorry to say this, is speaking from both ends of her mouth. And it's quite sad. Because on one hand, she said they have issues with the chair, but because he cannot be removed, then Chiloba has to carry that burden. Let's make it very clear that until, and I want to insist, until the IEBC is given reasons on what to work on from the Supreme Court ruling, we are just speculating, all of us. And then also, Linda, the other thing that I also want to make it very clear. We went into an election. Jubilee had no reason whatsoever to rig or to steal any election because we did our campaigns. We had the numbers. But it appears from the word go, in fact, we were wondering why all those people were spending a lot of time doing press conferences. It appears from the word go, from the minor KI case, from all the quotes that were, the things that were being raised, that actually NASA was prepared to bungle the electoral process. And what was happening, therefore, they were very keen even to supply the evidence to court because they were working in counts. How do you explain to me, Linda, that a whole returning officer refuses to sign Form 34? How do you explain that? How do you explain to me that most of these errors are from the NASA strongholds? How do you explain that to me? It is a situation where, well, one group, and that is Jubilee, was preparing to win an election. The other one was preparing to bang one election so that then we can sit on the table, as Gladys is saying, we can negotiate for a government. But can you explain to me, like, the connection between the press conferences and bangling this election? No, it's very clear because when you are doing pressers, you are not campaigning. You are not campaigning as much. And Maina Kia is in the think tank of ODM, of NASA. He is the one who went to court, and it's because of his case that we are where we are today. As you look very carefully, even the issues, the clarity with which they were raised, it was a premeditated process. And remember very well, the people who are even threatening the Supreme Court, saying that they need to redeem themselves, it was from NASA. I want to say this without fear of doubt. Linda, that indeed we went to the election. And we will go to the election because we know we have the numbers. And Linda, I want to tell you, the NASA people know they don't have the numbers. They don't want an election. They want a caretaker government. They don't want an election.
Linda, now we are even being blamed for the clarity with which we presented our issues in court. It is because of the tyranny of brains that our lawyers have. No. The clarity with which we presented issues is because the lawyers are just very, very weak. Compared to the lawyers that Jubilee brought to court, to be honest. I mean, really, that was a walkover for NASA because of the clarity of thought, because of the caliber of lawyers that we have. But let me bring this point. And the point of Maina Kiai and the case. And this case cannot be used as a bad thing. This is a loophole that Jubilee wanted to use to rig. And this is why we said, and Maina Kiai went to court first, and we were only enjoined after IBC appealed. Otherwise, Maina Kiai and the civil society went to court on their own to say that how is it possible that the returning officer in the constituency announces results and those results are considered as provisional. This was the question that was being raised. It is not possible that the returning officer at the constituency, who is recognized in the Constitution, because presidential elections in the Constitution are conducted at constituency level. So the question that Maina Kiai raised in court was how it is possible that the person who is supposed to conduct the elections announces results which are considered as provisional and then altered at Bomas of Kenya. And this is what the court stopped. And when the court stopped this, it can only be a good thing for the country. It cannot be something to be blamed. You know, it cannot be something to be blamed. And let me go back. I mean, and Maura, I gave you your time.
Finish.
To speak. So you better give me my time to speak. You know, what happened now, how we managed to now catch up with Jubilee stealing the elections is because nothing could be done on the national level. Now, when the results were already altered in the system and they were trying to alter the results on the forms, and this is why forms were brought that had no security features, because the forms that were printed were supposed to have certain security features that if you scanned the barcode would show you the constituency that form is coming from. But the barcodes were showing restaurants in France, you know, utensil shops here, in Nairobi, wherever, because after changing the figures on the system, they needed to change these figures as well on the forms, and they were now unable to find forms on which to change the figures. And this is why there was a problem. This is why they were not able to defend this case in court. And what they were used to before, this Jubilee people who actually stole the election, what they were used to was the fact that the results from the constituency were provisional. And therefore, anything you changed at the national level, the signature that mattered was the signature of the national returning officer. And this is what we stopped, and this is why our stolen victory has been given back to us, and this is why we must clean up IEBC before we go to the election, and this is why we will not take Nusumkate at any cost. We want the full buffalo, which correctly belongs to NASA. Maura.
I think when I listen to Gladys Wanga, I am very, 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 very convinced that actually ODM planned very well and executed how to bungle this election. The flow of information that is coming on national television, where somebody is actually explaining how, on one account, you ensure that the returning officer is the final person to declare the results, and so Wafula Chebukati's role is only to declare. Then you make sure that your own people within the IEBC, the POs, the returning officers that you have colluded with, they exchange the original forms with the wrong barcodes, the ones that they themselves know are in those France kiosks. You make sure that you provide the actual evidence, and then you go before a Supreme Court that is highly compromised so that you can have your way.
Wow.
And let me explain. You also had your... No, just a minute. Can you be fair, Linda?
I'm being fair.
Yeah, just then give me my time.
Okay.
The point I'm trying to say is this. As a Supreme Court that is highly compromised, a Supreme Court that actually reads from the same script with ODM, an IBC where you have a memo, even before the Supreme Court has actually made its own finding through a considered judgment, is reflective of the NASA narrative. Wow. A situation where you have people who are actually inclined to ODM ending up bungling a process to justify a win that was not declared. In fact, let me say this. The court said very clearly, even if we don't agree, that the third respondent was not culpable. So to come to national television here and try to accuse Jubilee of the errors of the IEBC is basically a propaganda. Remember, Linda, how did we find ourselves here? Who is the person who went to the streets to demand that the IEBC, there must be changes? Who has been consistent in that? Who is this who made sure that by the time we went to elections, the commissioners were appointed 7 months, yet Kriegler had actually said clearly we need the commission to be in place by 2 years. Okay. It was a setup, it was a failure. They knew it, they knew how to bungle the process because they know they don't have the numbers. And what we are saying, we believed in the process. We did not want to interfere because we believed in the sovereignty of the people. We went out there and campaigned, but clearly there were people who are waiting. And that is why you can see people are not even ready and willing to concede. In fact, I would want to ask this question. The same IEBC that these people are accusing, the same process is the one that, made that Gladys Wanga to be the women rep. It is the same that the governors, that their principals have been going...
So if they have a problem with the presidential, they should have a problem
exactly.
with
That is a consistency. These are the people who are telling us here that you need to go and mobilize an individual there without following the due process. Yet they call themselves social democrats.
Okay.
That kind of hypocrisy is what Kenyans do not
Mheshimiwa, I need to take a break. People, you're watching. I'll give you your minutes or so.
There's very serious issues.
I know.
That Maura has raised.
I know, but I need to take a break for like a minute or so.
Can they really go to the break?
Okay.
Let me just go speak to these issues. One, there's a Supreme Court that is highly compromised. I think this is the kind of aspersions that Jubilee has been trying to cast on an institution such as the Supreme Court that is unacceptable. That we colluded with returning officers. And Linda, you bring the list of returning officers here. At least I know that the returning officer for the coast was a given Nancy Kariuki or a person like that. There was no way of colluding, because what had happened, this conspiracy began right at the point of
who is a girlfriend to one of your principals?
Maura, Maura, you know,
you see, when you start
you are a freshman. You are a freshman when I was Secretary General of KUSA in
we were in the same student leadership.
You can't heckle me. You know, you can't heckle me.
So the truth of the matter is you cannot come on national television and start saying that it's Nancy Kariuki just because it's from a certain community. We also tell you that you could also be a girlfriend of your principal.
Personal, because that person is not
here to defend. Address issues. That's the point.
You know,
that's the point.
Maura has raised an issue here, and Maura, I did not heckle you when you were speaking. So don't heckle me when I'm speaking.
not heckling you. I'm trying to clarify.
You're not I did not interrupt you. I waited for you to finish.
Let her finish.
Yeah, I waited for you to finish.
Severally.
Okay. Can we let her
I waited for you to finish. So let me also finish my points.
Go on.
And the point I was speaking to is the point that Maura is saying that we compromised returning officers.
True.
And I was trying to make a point to say that returning officers was the first point of conspiracy for the IBC when they recruited returning officers, and they tried to mix them up as much as possible. And even the returning officers, for example, the ones in home, I mean, they were all truly mixed up. So there was no way of saying that these people were being compromised from our regions and so on. And I'd already made the point. I had already made the point that if returning officers signed their forms, but these forms could not be presented because the figures had been changed on the system by Jubilee and IBC. And remember, one of the people who had logged into the IBC system was one DK Chirchir, who was the chief agent for Jubilee. What was Chirchir doing in the IBC system? You know, these are the serious questions that we must ask and that must be answered. And the point that is serious, and not just IBC, and one of the things we're going to do, and Orengo has said is going to do, is to bring evidence to the DPP to begin to investigate the third respondent on his role in the stealing of this election.
But the Supreme Court made it clear that he
had and you see what?
to do with this.
No, Linda, let me say
we are bringing evidence to the DPP. We are bringing evidence to the DPP. We are bringing evidence to the DPP.
It is evidently
this election
clear,
absolutely have to take this
no, let me say this. It's evidently clear
I have to take this
that actually these people are the ones who are manufacturing the evidence. That is why they are saying they have the evidence, and they're even supplying members to the IBC.
I'll give you a minute. You're watching Crossfire. Clearly, this is Crossfire. You're watching this on KTN News. Allow me to take a break. We'll be back in a few minutes.